This is the War Room Roundtable podcast, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant businessmen and women on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they've learned on the road to success, and get exclusive advice on how to implement their successes into your life and business. The War Room Roundtable is brought to you by your hosts, Jason Miller, CEO of Strategic Advisor Board, and Phillip Lanos, CEO of Own the Rhythm, and former podcast host for Entrepreneur and Inc. magazine. Welcome to the War Room. Sean, it's a pleasure to have you here. How you feeling?
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah. Listen, we like to kick things off by asking, do you come from a family of entrepreneurs, or what was the working life around you, the environment like when you were growing up?
That's a good question. Honestly, I don't know if anybody's ever really asked me that way. I mean, people say like, what was it like in your house and what was the work ethic like, or who knows what, but it was weird because it was kind of entrepreneurial, but not quite. My dad owned an agency, but it was he sold healthcare insurance back in the Glenn Glary, Glenn Ross days. The whole like second place gets steak knives and third place gets fired, right? First place gets a car. I mean, like literally that era. And like, he ran what was in essence though a really independent agency, just tied to this one outfit down in Texas. So like from my view, he just had agents in an office, and I never knew any of the guys that he worked with down in Texas. He'd fly down there to go meet him every once in a while, but for all intents and purposes, for about 10 or 15 years of his life, he was basically independent. I mean, there's a distinction, as I've learned, and most people learn when they go on the entrepreneurial journey. There's a huge gulf between kind of on your own and on your own. they're like a world of difference, and so like he was kind of on his own, but there's a lot of things I learned. I mean, I just told a story of him related to sales that I tell my own sales team anytime somebody new joins, and I just told it again for the 100th time to somebody new just an hour ago. I mean, so I learned a lot from him, even though he sold in a very different environment. But yeah. So no, but nobody. Let me think. My aunt owns a business with her husband, but he started it. Taking nothing away from what she's done, but he started it. I mean, I'm the first one as far as I know. I mean, I know the Campbells go back as far as 1000 AD because we're traveling to Scotland in a week to go see some old Campbell castles. And so I bothered to go figure it out. So, but I don't know if any of those dudes were. I guess if you own a castle, you're probably entrepreneurial. Probably. However they defined it back in 1300, I would assume that's self-employed. If you own a castle, you're self-employed. My guess.
Yeah, man.
Probably a good guess.
So how did that the reason why I asked that is because I'm curious to know how that informed your professional decisions when it was time for you to start understanding the prospect that you're going to have to go into the working world, and how that may have shaped your path up to this point. So knowing that and watching that growing up, how did that sort of affect the decisions that you made to eventually get to where you are today? What were some key things that you think might have contributed to you arriving here today?
That's interesting. There's a few things in there. I mean, I guess first thing is I kind of ran away from it, to be honest. I didn't really want to do sales. I didn't. If you told me I was going to own a business, I would have thought it's sales and I don't really want to do it. I was going to be a college professor. And that's what I really wanted to do. And because I'm pretty much pathologically incapable of learning something and not wanting to teach somebody else what I learned. I mean, that's just the way I'm wired.
The feeling.
If I learn one thing, I'm like, who around me needs to know the thing I just learned? Not in like an obnoxious way, but just like, I learned how to do this skiing thing. Wouldn't you like to learn how to do this skiing thing? And so like, and that's pretty much the way I am. And so I thought, teaching, etc. And this is supposed to be by design, not a 7-hour podcast. So we'll leave that part of the journey off to the side. But like long and short of it, I end up not going down the full teaching route, ended up teaching though in a professional context, like networking databases, etc. And then get the opportunity to show up as an independent trainer with two other guys. And we build this company off the three of us. And before I know it, I own a business. And what I've kind of come to learn is that like, there's so much opportunity to be exposed to challenges, figure them out, move ahead, get to the next challenge, figure it out, solve problems. And there's so much opportunity to mentor if you have a staff. I feel like apprenticeship is like way underrated. It's weird for me to even say that because like I'm a guy who really believed in full-blown education, training, classroom. That's what I wanted to do. I mean, there's still a part of me that kind of wants to go back and do it when I retire in some ways, but like, I love mentoring people, and a business lets me do that all day long. And then on top of it, I own a business that a large portion of what we do is research. So in a way, even the research component of being a professor, I ended up getting to do like understanding markets and stuff like that. But no, I mean, in a weird way, I first ran away from it because I thought it was like, I don't want to do that. And I don't want to go there. And, meanwhile, like most good parents, to this day, I can picture my dad saying things to me like, I think you'd be good at sales, and me being like, no, I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? But like most dads, they kind of know, at least decent dads, they know where you're going to go before you know where you're going to go. And, he's passed a number of years ago, but I think to some extent he thought it was pretty logical. But for me, I kind of spun away from it for a while and then came back. And to sum all that up, I end up in a business getting a lot of the educational, even the research and all that like mentoring and coaching. And I never really thought it would be in a business. I used to think the kids getting up for business school classes at 8, since I was a liberal arts grad, were idiots. I was like, why would you get up so early to take an accounting class, man? I mean, like I got a liberal arts class that starts at 6 p.m. You know what I mean? So I can go do that. And, but I would never not own a business now. I mean, until something else hits me the same way owning a business did, but like, I just really, really like all the aspects of it. But I guess the only other thing I'd say is, but none of it's like the kingdom building stuff. I don't have plans for world domination. None of it's, I guess, what I hear of is typical motivations. It's mostly, I get a lot of juice from just learning and mentoring people. And I get to do a ton of that as the business grows.
I love that story specifically because it's so opposite of what most people would go into business for in general. It's exciting to know that what you wanted out of life, you found another path anyways, because that's the point, right? Is if you can identify what it is you actually want to do a thing for, then the options multiply, as opposed to thinking it's got to be this way. And I'm one of those people that I'm very like, it's got to be this way. And I try to get out of my own way every day. And somehow I always surprise myself with the way that I can come up. It's like sometimes when you're smart, you can come up with very creative ways to get in your own way.
Oh, totally. Totally. No, I had a guy working for me for years, a really, really good guy who kind of had a similar problem. Super good guy, but no, totally get it.
No, it's a real thing. So to hear your story, it's just a great reminder, something you can put on a world map and say, okay, so you're trying to get here, but why do you want to get there? I don't know.
One quick thing about that, just briefly, is that because it's important not always to give essay answers when you're being interviewed, right? We want to give some multiple choice. But like, I was even coaching my oldest son this the other day. He's at that stage. I love him to death. He's 20, but he's doing that thing just to protect him because he's, I don't want to say too much of his life story for his own sake. But, imagine a 20-year-old kid thinking of the 17 different things they could do with life. And what I was trying to coach him was, notice the similarity between these 17 things, though. Look at the things that are similar, and don't so much lock in on, I have to do this thing. Like try to ask yourself, out of all the things you're dabbling in, what's those 6 or 7 pieces of DNA that look similar? Because to your point, if you can recognize that about yourself early, sure, not every job will be like awesome. You can't always guarantee that. And not every week or year in a job will be awesome, but you can at least know, like, I'm using what I was wired to use. Right. And And I think some people don't really spend enough time reflecting on like that part of it. They look at the externality of the job or the career or whatever, and I'm like, figure out what you were made to do and see how that played out. And I think for some people, they have to go out and talk to people, somebody outside of them to figure that out. I mean, I'm not a career coach or anything, so that's not what I do for a living, but like, I know there's people who do that. So maybe sometimes you need that too. I don't know.
I love it. I love it. Before we even go any further, I want to let Jason chime in on some of these things because I know he's loving this conversation.
Yeah, it's a fun conversation, actually. And it's funny because I got a daughter. I got one that's 22 and one that's 27 now. And we had that same conversation just this last Thanksgiving. They're both in the medical field. So they both educated, all this stuff. And you're sitting around having that water cooler talk, right? And you get this feeling like, well, they just really aren't all that happy with what they're doing, right? And it's interesting because both of them, I would have never, ever thought would have went into the medical field ever, right? Would have never thought that was a fit for either of them. And I spent 23 years in the military, so I just figured, well, they'll probably do that too, right? And my oldest daughter did, then got pregnant, then couldn't ship, yeah, blah blah blah, right? But it's interesting how I didn't influence them at all, really, when it comes to the path they were going to take. And I think they're both really quickly realizing that they took the wrong one, right? And they should have, or maybe would have, if I maybe would have pushed a little harder, did the military thing. And or maybe not, I don't know, but because I don't believe in pushing kids to that either. But that's what happened to me, is because my whole family's done that, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and I didn't want that pressure on them to have to do that, right? And they veered off from it, but I think now they both very much look back and go, man, maybe I should have did that. So it's interesting how
Yeah. But it
that,
sounds like you had all the right motivations. It's the same thing, right? I mean, it's a tough thing with kids because like
it is,
you watch them kind of orbit around certain things, and you're not sure if that's like a permanent thing, and then and then you even notice them pick up things and you're like, gosh, I should have done more of that when they were 4. My eldest is a whiz with putting things together mechanically and cars and like all kinds of stuff, and I'm like, we never tore down a car when he's 5 because I'm only so handy. And then you're kind of like, I mean, I'm not a avid indoorsman, as they say. I'm better than, I don't just do that. You know what I mean? Like I fish and camp and go do all kinds of stuff and ski, but like, there's, yeah, it's interesting. When you coach anybody like that, even if it's your own kids, and, where'd you serve, by the way? Not to make it about you guys, but I'm just curious.
Oh, where didn't I?
Or what branch, I guess. Yeah, what branches?
Army. I was Army. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Kind of all around then, pretty much.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Every 3 years. Jink. Next move.
Well, that's one of the things my eldest is thinking about. He's thinking about Air Force because he loves working on anything that moves and flies. And so we went to the Thunderbirds air show, and he was just like, those would be fun to work on. You know what I mean? I'd be like, yeah, they sure would be. You know what I mean? So like, but yeah, it's a tough thing to figure out what to do there. But
the Air Force, if you're gonna go Air Force. Jesus Christ.
You heard it there from a man from the Army.
Right. Go Air Force, man.
Well, I don't know anything about it, right? And anybody listening, again, keep in mind what I'm about to say next. I don't know anything about it, right? But like, it just strikes me just from the optics. It's like, so the Air Force, at least in this era, pretty decent base. You know what I mean? You're not out there in the mud. You know what I mean? You're not on a ship for 7 months going who knows where. You know what I mean? And you got to love the Marines. They're always like first in somewhere, but that's a tough and different discipline. You know what I mean? In that crew, right? And I'm like, huh, I don't know. Cool airplanes, decent enough base. You know what I mean? I don't know, but there's pros and cons. I mean, you could be driving a drone out of Vegas in a shack, you know what I mean, for 10 years, you know what I mean, staring at a computer screen. So like, I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that either, but that's not exactly zooming across the sky personally. So, you know, it just kind of depends, you know, so who knows?
What I love about the energy of our conversation and sort of like the theme of it is it's how people are coming to decisions, you know, and how successful entrepreneurs are looking at not only parenting, but how it causes them to reflect on their own choices. And obviously we started off the conversation with sort of your own background and how that influenced where you are. So there's a really interesting energy taking place in our conversation. And it leads me to believe you. So you then land on professional services, which is broad, but you know, you can go a number of routes with it, but it's all encompassing. And is it because you were so interested in all those fields once you got down and started doing the research that you were like, how am I supposed to pick one of these? Or because, you know, some people only do like one thing. Our firm specifically only works on X, Y, Z. And you're like, you know, we do a lot of things, but because we can do all of it together because they all work together. What was that like, making that decision for Cascade Insights?
I wish to say it was a conscious choice, but it was more just a like one thing led to another. I mean, it's really what it was. I mean, I started out as an independent trainer, was with those two other guys. We ended up having Microsoft as an account that we were doing a lot of kind of work with at the time. I say when Microsoft was cool, this was like circa 1999, you know, when 97% of every computing device was owned by them, which if you really think about it for a minute, like you hear that number and you go, okay, 97%. Just picture if every TV was a Samsung, like 97%, or if every phone was an iPhone. There was no such thing as, I mean, it was an odd era if you look back and think about it. I mean, 97% of everything is a Ford. I mean, like that would just be weird. And so anyway, so we had them as an account, and that taught me a lot about like how to deal with large scale organizations and all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, services seemed to be a logical thing for three guys who were independent trainers because we could do consulting, and kind of drift into that. And then anyway, there's a journey after that. But I mean, frankly, it was a very logical thing. I never really had a massive interest in like owning a company that makes product or whatever. It's a very different kind of thing. I mean, it's just a completely different business model. So yeah, just never really had a lot of interest in it.
Understood. Yeah. And again, this is just me hearing out sort of the training process here, because when I think about what this conversation has been, it really is one of those, just goes to show the way entrepreneurs think. You know, some of them may know exactly the kind of company they want to build, but after I have done like 2,000 of these now, Jason's got 400 or so already that we're catching up to. It's like, it's almost more often than not, it's the exception of the people who knew exactly what they were going for and they actually got it. And most everyone else was like, look, I just knew I wasn't going to be employed by somebody else.
I'll give you a really good concrete example of that. We always get asked by our employees in the first company and this one, and it's a reasonable ask. I'm not knocking them for the ask. You know, what's the plan? Like what's the plan for 2 years or 3 years from now or 4 years from now, right? And I always get asked it by some, I mean, God bless them, but some 25-year-old interviewee that I'm hiring who's like, tell me about the 4-year plan for your company, right? You know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, I know that's on Google that you need to ask that to know if it's a good place to work. But you know what I always say to them? I kind of say some version of, I mean, this is the short version of it, but it's longer in the interview. But I say like, you know, well, we don't really have one actually, because we'd rather just make a bunch of smart decisions one after the other. And if we make a dumb one, well, we'll try to make a smarter one after that. And so far that's served us pretty well, and we're relatively conservative. And so no, you're never going to hear from me that in, you know, year 2026, I plan to be 12 million in revenue or whatever made up number I come up with. And I say, and what's interesting is I get different reactions to that. I mean, some people are like, oh my God, I can't work for you. You must not know what you're doing. And then sometimes I get people that are like, wow, did you just say what I thought you said? Like, and I'm like, yeah, that's because that's the way it really works, man. The way it really works is whatever's in that spreadsheet, the guy that wrote it even knows that he's not entirely sure. And so they put it in the spreadsheet anyway. And so like, who are you kidding yourself, right? I mean, like, and but I understand it though. I mean, I get it. Like, you want to know this company has a plan, in air quotes, right? And I say the plan isn't so much like written down on paper over here. It's almost like it's every decision you make every day. I mean, all of those decisions lead you to a place. And like, it sounds so simple, but it's true. Like, you just every day you have to make a better set of decisions if you still want to have a business. And frankly, that's again one of the things I like about it. I mean, but it's yeah. So I know it's really organic, and I think most people don't get that until they've owned one. Which I'd also say the
Yeah.
best thing in the world is owning a business. I don't think there's a lot of things that make a lot more sense to you when you own one. Like, I imagine 200 years ago, it was like owning a farm. Like, once you own a farm, you understood like the means of production and like the cost of things and like, what it meant to actually like buy something, and then have to take care of it. I mean, there's just a million things that you just don't experience, I think, unless you own a business.
Jason comes from a family of farmers. I'm sure he's got a
Our P&Ls were on rock with chisels.
There you go. Right. No, exactly. I mean, there's just something about having to tend your own garden, so to speak, that you just, it changes things. It does. And I don't mean that even remotely like a political thing. I don't. I just mean it just changes the way you stare at things. You just don't think of things the same way. And so anyway, so I've said for years, I wish we could take every 18-year-old and give them a business for 2 years, in a way. Like, I mean, because I feel like they'd be, or equivalent things,
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of things that they could do better than just, drink and go to college. But that's,
I mean, could you imagine what society would be like if every employee that was finally ready to enter the workforce first understood what it meant to bear all the risk? Right.
Oh, right. Well, the example there, I always say to somebody, I say, if you're going to leave and start a business, I have two conversations, the same one. So maybe this is relevant or not. I'll make it short and we could talk about it more if you want. But the two conversations I always have with somebody who's going to start a business is I say, and by the way, I'm very supportive, clearly, of somebody starting a business, but I also want to keep it real. So somebody will say to me, like from corporate America, one of our clients, gosh, I'd love to have my own thing. I'm like, okay. Are you okay with the idea that at some point you might run out of money? And they're like, well, what do you mean? That's a gloomy way to begin the conversation. I'm like, because okay, so here's the deal. The minute you own a business, you're going to know precisely the day you run out of money. And you're always going to know it. You will never not know it. I don't care if it's 7 years from now.
Oh,
you
my
will
God.
know it. You will know that day. And if you don't know it, you will go out of business. So you don't get to not know it, because if you don't know it, then you never have to worry about it because you're gonna be out of business. And the second thing is, I do this little thing with like money where they'll be like, gosh, I'm gonna go out and, how many entrepreneurs do this, right? They're like, I'm gonna work 40 hours a week. No, I'm gonna work 60 because I'm working for myself. Okay, fine. We'll just let that slide for a minute because people do get sick. So you're gonna work 60 hours a week. And you got kids to go to recitals, but we'll leave it at that. So 60 hours a week, and you're not going to take any vacations the first 3 years because again, you work for yourself. Okay, well, that's a lie, but we'll leave it at that. And then they go make all this math up and they multiply it by an hourly rate, and they say, I'm going to make 400 grand a year. And I go, okay. So do you know what the tax bracket is for an entrepreneur? And they're like, it's different. And I'm like, yeah, it's different. So take at least 40% of what you made if you want to play it safe, and just chuck it in a drawer, because it's never your money anymore. They're like, 40%. I'm like, yeah, some years even more. And so they're like, and then I go, take that, throw that in a corner in a box. I say, and they're like, okay, well, that's fine. I mean, I can 170K. I can live off that. That's more than I made. Okay. So now take another 50% of that and throw it off for all of the sales and the marketing and the financial work and the help you're going to need. And once you're done with that, if you can live off that, your expectations are right. And I say, and then I always follow up with like, if you can survive those first few years, the multiples start to come into play, of course. And then, certainly many entrepreneurs make more than somebody working for a regular business, right? I mean, that's kind of somewhat, I wouldn't say expected, that's the wrong way to put it, but it's normative, right? It would be something you would expect in that sense. But not in the beginning at all, right? And most people don't know how to do that math, and that's a big deal. But I say if you can know where the end of the runway is and you can live with that problem, and sometimes what I say to people too on that, just to finish it off, is I say it's not much different than you working for a business. It's just you blind yourself to the idea that you could be deleted, right? It's the same concept. It's just you just don't really think of it that way. But in some other guy's spreadsheet, it's the same thing. And I would rather just control my own destiny most of the time. I mean, that's kind of the way I'd look at it. But anyway, I don't know if that's relevant or not. That's something
No,
I always
that
feel
was
like
perfect,
sharing.
man. That was great. I think that's exactly what people needed to hear, because it's true. If there's one thing, it's ironic, is if there's one thing I've been trying to elude and get rid of, is knowing exactly when my money is going to run out, and I can't seem to figure out.
No. See, and I tell you, the minute you think the minute you forget it, is when you'll never have to remember it for the rest of your life, because then it'll be gone. And you want to, no, I mean, it's like, it's not, you don't get away from it. It's just a little bit of the ball and chain of owning a business, and it's fine. It's a reasonable one. It keeps you sane, keeps you from buying the 4x4 when you shouldn't, kind of thing. Like it keeps it. So you're not that guy, you know what I mean? He's like 1 year into the business, and it's like, wow, nice new truck, Fred. And you're like, you won't be here in 2 years. You know what I mean? So like, yeah. So
Yeah,
anyway.
no, man, this has been exactly what we were looking for. Jason himself always reminds me, business, sometimes you got to have a short-term memory, especially when people begin to throw problems your way. You just got to let it roll off of you, because those are the inevitables in business. I have a lot of conversations with him in regards to things like this. So you're right on the money with what you're sharing. That was exactly what we were looking for. The best part about this is I want to check in with Jason before we move on to the latter half of this episode.
Sure.
As we begin to close things out. Any thoughts, anything coming to mind, Jason, for you?
I mean, I have lots of thoughts, but
Sure.
we don't have time.
Yeah, I figured. I let time get ahead of me here.
We already blew past the time, so we want to respect your time too.
Yeah.
Understood.
So if you have a website, a social channel, somewhere where you prefer for people to connect with you, where would you want people to connect with you?
I would have them just go to cascadeinsights.com. That's the company I co-own along with a guy named Scott Swigert. And if they want to reach out to me, I'm always happy to chat with folks. Doesn't always have to be about what we offer to the market. Like sometimes folks will just reach out to me about like, hey, I liked your story, or I'm starting my own business, or you got advice for a guy like me. I mean, I'm totally happy to spend time on stuff like that. And they can just email me. It's just Sean, SEAN at cascadeinsights.com.
Right on. Okay. And now the big enchilada for the whole show is, if you could have invited anybody, dead or alive, to this conversation today, who would you have loved to have had here, and why them?
It's a super hard question for me to answer like empirically, like the person. So I'll give you the first person that came to mind, which maybe has a little bit of recency bias, because now I sound like a guy who owns a market research firm, right? So like, but the and this hopefully ties back to the whole thing. So maybe it's a good way to end it. Like whenever I face a problem, I'm just like, I'm gonna go learn the heck out of it. So I think it's fair to say that the last presidential election and maybe the last few have left people on every side with their own set of questions. Let's just leave it at that, right? And so I looked at all that and I thought, very typical me, I'm like, people have a lot of questions about presidents in America. I'm going to go read a biography on every single US president in order, so I can actually understand, like, from my own perspective, like what this is. And I would have to say, out of all the biographies I read, and right now I'm up to Wilson, So I didn't, it's not like one of those stories where I gave up after the third biography. I think I'm going to make it to the end. If I made it to Wilson, I think I can make it all the way up to Biden at this point. I mean, there's a lot of very snoozy presidents. Let me just put it that way in the 19th century. Some of those biographies, I barely made it through. And so guys we long forgot from 8th grade history, right? But anyway, so Teddy Roosevelt. And the reason I would say is, again, this isn't maybe like the ultimate, but he's first guy that came to mind. I mean, he sat at an interesting turning point in American society. I mean, one of the reasons I think people like the movie Titanic is because it's this moment frozen in time of like, on one side of it, you had kings and queens, and after it, you didn't. And on one side of it, you were pre-World War I, and the other side, you didn't. I mean, sure, some people watch that movie for the romance and the ship sinking, and I get all that in the iceberg. But part of what's happening in that movie is you're watching like this dividing line between times, in a way. And Roosevelt was just before that, and there's so many interesting things about the guy. There's a wonderful 3-part biography I read about the guy. I mean, even after 2,700 pages, I was still pretty enthralled about like who the guy was and what it was. So I'd bring him on. He had some interesting perspectives, and I would, if I could bring him back, and there were plenty of presidents, as I already alluded to, that I would never invite him. They were pretty boring. So I mean, there's a few that I'm not really sure how much they did for America, but like, hey, they were president, so that's okay. Let that roll. But
right on, man. No, it's been a really fun conversation chatting with you, man. So much so I let time get ahead of me, but I appreciate the time, the energy, and I hope this isn't the last time we chat. It's tradition around here for Jason to close us out, so I'm gonna let him do that. But man, great conversation.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, this was a great way to end the day. I got to tell you, this was a great way to end the day on this conversation, because I mean, we have a lot of conversations, and some of them are a little mind bending, to say the least, sometimes. But this one was fun, and just enjoyed having you on the show, and thank you for being here. Good stuff.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate the energy you brought to it too, and hopefully I made your last interview here a good one. And, just other than that, thanks for having me on.
Right
Best
on,
of luck,
brother.
guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the War Room Roundtable with your hosts, Jason Miller and Phillip Lanos. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and always remember, if you can dream it and believe it, then you can go achieve it. We'll see you in the next episode.